over the past week, I've been doing tons of level design on my game, Synth Beasts, and it's kind of like a game that's a mix of Pokemon and Zelda, and how it works is that you explore a world with puzzles and enemies, but instead of using items to interact with those, you catch monsters and use their abilities. And also, the game has a Steam page, so go wishlist it, the link's in the description. So the first thing that I did this week was try to finish up the ice level that I've left on the back burner for a while, and thankfully I did manage. And when I started making it, the first thing I did was make the sketch, and usually when I start this process, I always outline what I want the level to introduce. And for Synth Beast specifically, I started the game's development by having a list of interesting monster abilities that I wanted the player to use, and then I split those abilities up into different levels. So the ice level, which is the one that I did this week, it has 3 main monsters, and the first one is one of my favorites, which allows you to jump over these goop puddles, but it's also pretty good for dodging projectiles. Then there's the second one, which allows you to plant bombs, and they can either destroy ice crystals or be used to deal massive damage to enemies. And finally, here's the jellyfish that shoots projectiles in kind of like a circle motion, and it works really well for certain puzzles, as well as dealing damage in combat arenas with tons of enemies. So once I had decided what enemies to include in the level, I made the full level layout and annotated where each of the mechanics would be introduced or used in an interesting way, and when all of that was finished, this is what it looked like. And just as a quick comparison, this is what the bird's eye view of the white box based on the sketch looks like, and this is what the fully decorated level based off of the white box looks like now. So at each stage, you can kind of see how it builds off of the previous one, but when you look at the very beginning and at the very end of the process, the difference is really quite substantial. And when making the white box, I really try to mostly copy the layout of the sketch, but sometimes I have to change stuff to make it fit a bit better geometrically, since not everything that seems to work on paper works in practice. And you can see that in the sketch, because it's really geometric and straight, but the white box has slightly more curves, and those are accentuated even more in the decoration phase. And just to give you an example, the section over here is supposed to be a loop back point, and it has an empty space in the sketch that acts as a way to separate rooms, but in the white box it's a bit more natural, and it's even more so in the decorated version. And one thing that I've realized over the past few years is that when you're making a white box and you're trying to determine the scale, you should always try to make the level smaller rather than bigger if possible. And then when decorating, I do the same thing. If I'm going over the white boxes and I'm trying to match the shape with the decorated objects but I can't, then I'll almost always opt for making the shape bigger to occupy more space. In general, having too much empty space without a reason can lead to boring idle time, so this is a nice way to avoid that as much as possible. And when it comes to decorating, it's easy to get into the mentality of trying to make stuff just look nice, right? But there's a really functional point to decorating levels that I think sometimes is easy to miss, and that is to aid exploration. Like for example, look at the right and left of the screen. These areas look very similar, and if you're exploring a level, it might be easy for you to forget where you are because everything just kind of looks the same. Now, these are the 2 same areas that I just showed, but decorated, and it's very easy to know where you are now, because even though the actual gameplay space is very similar, visually they're incredibly different. One key principle that I like to use is to separate areas into kind of chunks, and then each chunk has its own kind of visual identity. And it would be very easy to just have each chunk be wildly different, like just have a fire area and then follow with a water area, but for most games that just feels jarring and doesn't really work. So what I like to do is to have an overarching area, which is for this week's level kind of an icy area, but then each chunk has its own identity. For example, this chunk here is definitely an ice area, but it's easy to know where you are when exploring because it's the only area that has a giant pillar in the middle of a lake. The same goes for here, where there are these blue shiny mushrooms that are super easy to spot, and it's the only place that you can find these. And for this specific mushroom example, it's very important for this area to be very easy to remember because it's a shortcut point. So when you explore the level, there's a point where you can go back to earlier parts through this point, and having this extremely unique section helps players remember where exactly they are, so they have a better idea for how the level is structured. And just to give you some examples of how much decoration can really aid exploration, I'm going to show you some similar areas in terms of their geometry, and then you'll be able to see the impact of the really simple changes. So these 2 sections here, they're really similar, right? And you can see that they have kind of a zigzag kind of pattern, and it's actually no surprise because when I was making this top section, I wanted to basically copy paste the bottom one to explore how different enemies can make you interact with the same kind of space in a different way. So the bottom part of the white box looks like this, and then the top part looks like this. So they're really similar, right? Well, this is what the bottom part looks like fully decorated, and this is what the top part looks fully decorated. Now, I mean, they're both icy, but they're still extremely different, and it's super easy to know in which of the two locations you're at when exploring. So that's a very easily comparable situation, but sometimes it's not all about decoration that can make levels easy to remember. Like this section here is just a thin strip of land that makes you walk forwards for a while dealing with enemies, and it feels so different in terms of the way that you're interacting with the explorable space that it helps the players remember where they are. There's no other strip of land in the whole level that acts this way. So I think leveraging these two concepts can make your level easier to remember even without like a world map or anything. It makes you feel so much more empowered as a player because you don't feel like you're getting stuck or lost. You know exactly where you are because you can use these little guide points as references to other locations. And overall, I personally think this is the best way to approach decoration. I know that some people like to come up with the story of a game before they do all of this so they can decorate an area in a way that makes sense in the context of the story. But when you do that, it often hurts the gameplay part of the game because you're not putting that first. So for instance, SynthBeast has scientists around the world that give you little lore tidbits, but I didn't start writing those until the level was fully decorated. And I feel because I had decorated everything really organically to serve gameplay, the scientist's dialogue almost feels more natural because the level feels more natural in that it was created for it to be easy for the human mind to navigate and understand. But the ice area was not the only thing I did this week. I also made a start on making the game's hub world, and initially I had just planned for having a linear progression of levels, but after wrestling with a bit of the demo's feedback, I think having a hub after all does make a lot of sense, especially with some of the new features that I'm implementing. And so this is what it looks like, and so far I'm really happy with how it's turning out, and it's definitely not done yet in terms of decoration, but I think the general layout is pretty much there, and this is what the original sketch looked like. And as you can see, the sketch and the final result are kind of different in a few key ways. Originally the plan was to make the hub an island that you can then take boats to other islands, and you can see that in the sketch. These are kind of like the three little docks of the three main areas. But in the end, it became something like a heavenly area, which I think has really cool story implications. So instead of taking boats to the level, you now take an elevator down, so it's a bit more unique, I feel. And around the level, you'll see these clouds, and I'm really happy with how they turned out, and they're actually 3 distinct layers of a water shader that I modified the visual properties to make the effect catch the color of the scene's main light. And it works super well with the day-night system, because during the day, the color of the light is more orange, and then during the night, it's more blue, so it feels really whimsical in both versions of the level. And apart from that, I have one last thing that I'm going to cover in this devlog, but before I do, I wanted to let you all know that SynthBeast's Steam page is in the description, so it would really help support the game so much if you went there and wishlisted it. I also made an announcement this week that Wanted Shadows, a game that I released last year, and it's also in SynthBeast universe, is actually coming to mobile next month, so I put a link for the pre-order down below. It only costs $0.99 USD, complete steal. Pocket Gamer, which is the biggest mobile gaming site, also covered that, so we're on a roll for that, and go to the description if you want to check it out. Either way, the last thing that I wanted to cover in this devlog is that I added this CRT filter to the game, and I think that it looks really cool, and I definitely want to make it at least an option, but I was wondering, do you think I should make it default to on or off? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next devlog. Bye.